Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Well, I have to say, I am having quite the Neil Gaiman kick at the minute. I have just finished Volume 2 of the Sandman audio drama, and I'm hotly anticipating the Sandman Netflix series coming next year. I'm still thrilled following the David Tennant and Michael Sheen starring Good Omens, which I'm also very excited for a second series of that. And so, as you can imagine, it's all Gaiman all the time. And so, by chance, something that I will say, when I selected this film to sort of slot into the previously scheduled but slightly delayed Halloween portion of my videos, I had forgotten that Coraline was in fact a Neil Gaiman story novel adapted into an animated film, which is something I quite gleefully discovered following watching the film, or rediscovered. It feels like something I knew but had just filed away, but it makes sense looking back now in terms of the structure of the story, the nature of the relationship between, well, wake and dream, between our world and sort of the world just beyond the wall. It feels very much in the Gaiman camp of the types of stories that he wants to explore and the nature of story that he wants to explore. And Coraline is another of my endless examples of films that just throughout my life skipped me. That I had heard of it. It was something that I was aware was very well received at the time when it came out. I would have been the appropriate age for it when it came out, but for whatever reason I skipped it, never watched it, and neglected to ever follow up on it in the preceding years. And frankly, that was a mistake, because Coraline is such a good horror. It's a good children's horror, because it really plays into themes and ideas that treat children, with a certain amount of delicacy, but at the same time it doesn't treat them like they are fragile. Children almost are more compelled to absorb horror than adults, not because children of course are quite easily scared, don't get me wrong, but a child's capacity for imagination and the ways that they assimilate the world and process everything means that in the nature of storytelling and the nature of how horror works and the mechanics of it, this kind of story really suits a child's imagination. Because, as I say, it's very much about the way a child tries to interpret the world around them, and whether you want to treat the narrative literally, like there is a door that leads to another dimension or another reality, or whether you want to treat it more metaphorically, that it's about a child expressing or internalizing their experiences and the things that haunt and trouble them, and the way that they react to people. You can go either way with it, and again, that's a very Neil Gaiman thing, the idea of the metaphysical and the real, and those two things are not mutually exclusive, that something can both be real and imagined, and neither interpretation is less valid than the other. Because, like I say, if you sort of look at the characters in the real quote-unquote world that Coraline interacts with, Benini, and the fact that he, to her there's something otherworldly about him, the fact that he's this sort of eccentric, sort of over-the-top character who's constantly bouncing around and talking about his mice and is blue. Well, a child would interpret those things in a certain way. Subtly, though, the film, of course, infers why he is the way he is, what caused his, the discoloration of his skin, which of course all feeds into Chernobyl. And like I say, a child would interpret such things in a certain way without the knowledge of why they are the way they are. Then, of course, you have the two actress ladies, who actually, I said my instinct was to say sisters. I don't know why, because watching it, I'm fairly sure they're in a relationship. But the two actresses who live together, and of course they sort of play into sort of often you get two or three older ladies in sort of classic Gothic stories, or sort of stories that would be period for the times, sort of 17th, 18th century. You constantly get these stories of sort of groups of elder ladies who sort of are huddled together and interact with children in certain ways, and again, the fact that for intents and purposes they are fairly normal people, but the way that Coraline perceives them is to see them as, there is something quite extraordinary about them in her eyes. And of course, when she imagines them in the other world, they are what her potential for them can be. I mean, all of the characters are what the potential for them can be. The idea that from a child's perspective, reality is already imaginative enough, and there's already so much potential. But in the world of the inner world, or the other world, depending on how you want to perceive it, there are no limitations, and everything can be as much or as a child would want it to be. And then, of course, you have the whole interpretation of neglect and the idea of sort of the psychological effect on Coraline with her parents, and the idea that, in the real world they are unintentionally neglecting her, and not in a damaging or harmful way, but just simply because their priorities are elsewhere. I like to read into it the fact that they are, that this is not extraordinary for them. It's not that this is a particularly busy period in their lives. That, unfortunately, based on the characters that people that they are, that Coraline feels consistently this sense of being ignored. And it's not that she is, but of course it feeds into the idea that children, if they're being ignored a little, they feel that sense, that greater sense of, oh, this is all about them. A child's world is theirs, and they are the centre of it. And so therefore, the fact that the parents focus more on their work commitments makes Coraline feel this endless sense of abandonment. And of course that leads to Other Mother and this, the sort of, I suppose, the old-fashioned patriarchal gender roles that Coraline almost desires, so that when she goes into Otherworld, Other Mother is this good cook who is tending and caring and gives all her time and attention to Coraline. You can sort of look at sort of a feminist reading of that, and the idea that, despite the fact that Coraline is a child and therefore shouldn't really be, gender roles shouldn't really be being imposed upon her on some subconscious level, they already are. And of course her own desires fit in with those roles. So the idea that her mother is a working woman doesn't fit into what Coraline would desire, which is to have more of a traditionalist mother role. And again, like I say, this is a struggle. It's not a black and white, because, like I say, is it real? Is it imagined? It doesn't matter. It doesn't, this is not supposed to be a fixed state. This is a child processing all that and trying to interpret it. And so the greatness about it is that by the time we get to the end and the big confrontation, and of course, in story terms, of course, we have that sense of, oh, there are revelations and monsters and confrontations. Even following that, there isn't a sense of, oh, well, everything is resolved. It just simply moves to the next stage. If you put Coraline alongside something like Inside Out, I think both films have very similar stories about the idea that, coming of age isn't the idea that a character comes of age and then their story stops. It's the idea that they are transitioning to a different way of dealing with the world. And there will be new challenges in that respect, but it doesn't, it simply means that they are dealing with it in a new and different way with a new enlightened perspective. And I think that's what's this takeaway of Coraline should be, the idea that Coraline has learned and changed and grown and appreciates her parents in a different way and her community in a different way, and defeated other mother, which I think is possibly also a very good thing. And of course cats. It has a wonderful cat character who is not a villain, who is in fact an aid to Coraline, and I will appreciate that, because of course, as is the way of things, cats are often portrayed as the villains in a lot of narratives. It's nice to see one who is more in a supporting, assisting role. And again, the animation is the quality of this is so good, and it's not to sort of put it alongside or in competition with anything, but it's just standalone. Coraline as a non-Disney feature, it's just, there's so much to it. There's so much bounce and colour and just vivacity to it, that and it knows how to use light and dark. So it knows you have moments where everything's all colourful and bright, but it also knows how to use the shade and the darkness, so that when we get to the darker side of stuff, and the more the shadows grow longer, it knows how to animate that in a way that means it's not compromising the visuals. It feels like, oh wow, I want to see the layers and textures of darkness as well as the layers of textures of colour that exist within the story. And I think the animation is just so great. And it's funny really, because I do love Disney, I love Pixar, but there are many films that I think get sort of forgotten or overlooked because they're indies, or they're something like one of my favourite films one of my favourite animated films was Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, which of course is a DreamWorks, but you get the How to Train Your Dragons, which admittedly are great, fantastic films and are well appreciated, but if you get something like Coraline, there is always the fear that it'll slip under the radar, which it hasn't, but I'm fairly confident there are definitely animated films that I have just sort of let pass me by because they're not part of one of the big companies, and I think that's a shame. But yeah, Coraline, perfect children's horror to the level of something like the classics, like Nightmare Before Christmas, or not even horror, but sort of more complicated ideologies like Watership Down. And I think I wish there was that sense that children's storytelling will go back to something a bit richer and treating them with a bit more kudos, that they go, children can process these things, and it actually helps them to be able to deal with stories like Coraline, because it's so good and it's so mature, I suppose, for a children's film, in a way that I think is layered. And I don't know, I think it's great. Perhaps a child would think differently, but I just think it's such a good film, and I really do hope stands the test of time. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below and share the video, because it's all helped me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Check out my back catalogue of over 250 videos, and follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I tweet about TV shows and films, and I share these videos once they're uploaded to YouTube, either the day of or the day after. Thank you for joining me. Take care.